Welcome to Education in Focus. I'm your host, Eliana Kernodle. President Donald Trump signed an executive order to limit the government's recognition of two sexes based on male and female biology, a reversal of the Biden administration's attempt to expand the definition of sex discrimination to include gender identity. Joining me to dig into this is Chalkboard News editor Brennan Clary. Brennan, what were the specifics of the executive order?
Yeah, so specifically, Eliana, President Donald Trump said shortly after his inauguration that the executive branch of the government would reaffirm the biological reality of sex, and that it would be the policy of the United States to recognize two sexes, male and female. These sexes are not changeable and are grounded in fundamental and incontrovertible reality. So that's directly from the executive order there. And in effect, what that does is rescinds the Biden administration's regulatory expansion of Title IX, for example. So that was a big fight in the courts, and something that the Biden administration was trying to do up until the end of the administration, essentially. But they were trying to expand the definition of sex discrimination to include gender identity. And basically that would protect LGBTQ plus students, the Biden administration said. So that was the reason that they're trying to do this. And so what the Trump administration is doing is coming in and saying, we are going to focus in and hone in on recognizing two sexes, male and female. And in doing so, the executive order that Trump signed said that the administration disagrees with the legal basis for the expansion of the statute, of the Title IX statute. So essentially, the Biden administration was using the Supreme Court decision Bostock v. Clayton County, and they were trying to use that and apply it to the educational setting. And the Trump administration said that that argument does not hold water, and we're not going to continue to go along with the Biden administration's interpretation of that decision, the Bostock decision from the Supreme Court. And it also had, other specifics in there about focusing on the biological realities that's kind of quoting from the executive order. So, for example, it said, across the country, ideologues who deny the biological reality of sex have increasingly used legal and other socially coercive means to permit men to self-identify as women and gain access to intimate single-sex spaces and activities designed for women, from women's domestic abuse shelters to women's workplace showers. Quote, this is wrong. So that is again from the executive order there. So taking a very strong stand against what it calls gender ideology, and a quote, purposeful attack against the ordinary and longstanding use and understanding of biological and scientific terms, replacing the immutable biological reality of sex with an internal, fluid, and subjective sense of self unmoored from biological facts. Again, that's from the executive order. So it doesn't mince language in what it's trying to do.
So what are some of the potential practical implications of this executive order?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this is basically, from what I can tell, this is like all executive orders, like saying this is what our policy is, and then implementation comes from these different executive agencies and the different parts of the executive branch, right? So when Biden took office, he had an equity executive order, and so then when years down the road, the Department of Education was saying, well, this is pursuant to the Biden executive order that he signed upon taking office to try to promote equity in all, parts of the federal government. So I think it would have that kind of implication in terms of how policy is made. So it is, again, staking out, this is what we believe about gender identity, about sex, and some of these different kinds of biological things. Another thing that I think is very interesting is that it directs the Attorney General to issue guidance to agencies to, for example, correct the misapplication of the Supreme Court's decision in Bostock v. Clayton County. That was a quote from the executive order to reflect, quote, sex-based distinctions in agency activities. And then again, the Attorney General should issue guidance and assist agencies in protecting sex-based distinctions, which are explicitly permitted under constitutional and statutory precedent. So again, it does have, this is what the Attorney General shall do. It also has prohibitions in it too. It says the federal funds shall not be used to promote gender ideology. And quote, each agency shall assess grant conditions and grantee preferences and ensure grant funds do not promote gender ideology. And so it's a question of, the federal agencies can look at the different people, different organizations that have applied for grant funds, and they can say, well, we're not going to, promote, we're not going to give funds to you because you're saying this, or that you're saying you have like a stance on gender ideology. So I think that there are implications in terms of how essentially the bureaucracy is thinking about what it's doing, right? And so you have a lot of different sorts of things moving around in the different agencies in Washington, because these are huge and they have like a lot of different applications in terms of the scope and the federal reach. And so one aspect of that is I've covered equity webinars, for example, that are put on by different grant recipients, and they receive federal funds from the IDEA Act, the Special Education Funding Act. And, in some cases, they've said things that are controversial, that people have, said, hey, this that fits the bill of that gender ideology that the executive order is railing against, that, that there is sort of a spectrum of gender. And so under the Biden administration, that was sort of the standard, that you would affirm LGBTQ plus students. And so now there's a prohibition against using funds for that. So I think it really is a sea change in terms of how agencies are thinking about awarding grants to grantees and people who are applying for federal money. And it also is going to make that, I think, there might be some challenges. There might be some, states, or there might be some organizations that say like, no, you can't cut off the federal money because this is what we're doing, or like this would disparately impact these students, and here's why. But that's something that's going to be, I think, it's not going to be the status quo, right? It's going to be kind of the exception to the rule for people, I think, to go against the federal government and have the power and the resources to say we're going to challenge them, we're going to take it to them. So it's kind of unclear, I think, at this point, whether or not, or like what kind of impact this will have. Like if it will be sort of a, hey, this is our position on this, and we're just going to kind of move on, or if it's going to be sort of a farther ranging, like we're going to really take this and, aggressively pursue these kinds of actions. I think that has yet to be seen, but this is a big sea change from the Biden administration.
Well, Brendan, thank you for your insights on this story, and I'm sure you'll continue to follow where this goes in the future if it does have those more practical implications. Listeners can keep up with those at chalkboardnews.com.